And Mama in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap when, out on the lawn, there arose such a clatter. I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Clement Clark Moore. A visit from St. Nicholas. I loved Christmas as a child. My mom was really big into Santa Claus when I was growing up, maybe more so than I was. I remember one year she somehow convinced my grandpa to get up on our roof late one Christmas Eve night and stomp around up there. "It's him!" cried 6-year-old me, even then knowing in the back of my mind that I was suspending my disbelief. I was a cynical child, to be sure, but for me it didn't matter. For me, Christmas was about allowing my mother to get swept up in the magic and maybe, just maybe, to allow myself a bit of whimsy as well. The magic of Christmas is a powerful thing. The next year, I got my first telescope. I was really into outer space and weather as a kid. I suppose we all went through that phase at some point. Some of my best childhood memories are of my uncle taking me stargazing atop the big hill outside of town on the long, warm nights of the following summer. My mom stayed home for most of my outings with Uncle Rob, Robbie Rainbow, local Channel 4's resident meteorologist, but she was always there with me in spirit. Yes, I knew the telescope was from her and not some fat elf, but the fact that she masked her generosity behind mythology somehow made it even more special. It was just her and I in those days, and in truth, I think she just wanted me to believe in something. Which brings me to Christmas Eve, 1999. My last happy memory involving the jolly old elf was sitting on the lap of the mall Santa at our local shopping center that day. He was a bit overzealous with his ho-ho-hos and smelled a little bit like Uncle Rob's whiskey, but fouler. I was whispering something inane about a PlayStation that I knew Mom couldn't afford into the poor man's ear while she stood beaming, her eyes filled with childlike wonder, camera in hand. She was so beautiful in that moment. She was wearing the necklace that Dad had given her, the one with the tiny, flawless sapphire, on what was fated to be their last Christmas together, only 3 months before the drunk driver robbed us of so many family dinners and games of catch in the yard. Although she never used the name, I always thought of that sapphire as the Christmas star. Mom could only ever bring herself to wear that necklace at Christmas time, and in it she reminded me of the wife of a lost sailor, staring longingly out into the tide, an image I'd gotten from an episode of Pokemon that had made me cry. On the drive home, I recounted my experience to her, casually name-dropping the object of my supplications and watching those green eyes in the rearview mirror for a reaction. The eyes revealed too much. She didn't have the money for a PlayStation this year. Oh well. I was disappointed, sure, but her gifts were always thoughtful. I knew I wouldn't be on Christmas morning. Despite my misgivings, I went to bed dreaming of tiny reindeer. I knew there was no way in hell some enchanted, obese sleigh driver was coming to visit me and my mom and every other good little boy and girl on earth in that single night. The world didn't work like that. If it did, I'd still have my dad instead of spending my 4th Christmas without him. And yet in that in-between place of mental twilight, as I drifted off to sleep, as I named every galaxy and constellation I knew from my trips to the hill with Uncle Rob, I heard it. Jingling bells, rustling bushes, and the distinct sound of boot steps and soft humming outside my window. I joined in humming Silent Night and drifted off wondering what Christmas morning would bring, unsure what I believed. The magic of Christmas is a powerful thing. I awoke when it was still dark to a strange new game. Santa had come, and he had left a trail of muddy boot prints leading down the hall. I followed them backwards to their source at the front door. We didn't have a fireplace, so Mom told me the old man had a magic key. Careful to use my flashlight rather than turn on the lights and wake Mom. As I wandered our house, I became aware of the stench of piss-cheap alcohol that even I knew would be far below the standards of someone like Mom or Uncle Rob. The prints led from the door to the tree, from the tree to the table where I saw that the cookies had been hastily eaten, but the milk untouched. Into and out of each room in the house. The closets, unlike mine, were turned out. Mom must have forgotten where she'd hidden the presents. She should have cleaned that up. Santa wouldn't have made such a mess. It kind of took you out of the game. The mud looked real. Mom was normally so fussy about her carpet. And what was up with the smell? The tracks led to her bedroom. Was I meant to go in there? Was there a PlayStation or some other large gift I was meant to stumble upon in there? And where was Mom? I hesitated outside the door for a long time. I wasn't allowed in Mom's room without her okay, but it did seem to be part of the game. She was probably still asleep. Ultimately, my need to play Crash Bandicoot won out. Ever so slowly, I creaked open the door. As I turned off my flashlight and stuck my head inside the barely open door, my eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness. And that's when I saw him. A fat silhouette against the streetlight coming in through the window. St. Nicholas had paid us a visit, but what was he doing in my mother's bedroom? The stink was strong here. My vision continued to flicker from black to green to purple and back to slightly less black as my rods and cones did their thing. I watched in wonder as Santa Claus stood over my sleeping mother for a long time. Minutes, probably. Until finally he began to slowly turn toward her closet door just a few feet from the foot of her bed. Mom stirred, and the fat man jumped a little. Turning back to the bed, he paused, then began to creep to her bedside table. What happened next took place in seconds. As he passed behind the bed and closer to the window, the truth was revealed. The man was fat, yes, and he dressed as the jolly old elf, and he did stink. But this was no magical visitor. This was the Santa from the mall. He held a revolver. I stupidly thrust open the door and flicked on the light. I was blinded, and also deafened by the roar of the gun. By the time I could see and hear again, I was being shoved into the doorway by the crimson-clad burglar. I remember vividly the image of the man's chubby hand clutching the Christmas star as he reached the front door. The rest is a patina of post-trauma whirlwind. Mom holding me, making sure I was okay, giving a statement to the police, waiting for the phone to ring with news that they'd caught the bastard who'd violated my mother's sanctuary and stolen the last piece of my father from me. Except for one thing. Turning around, my ears still ringing, to see the bullet hole on Mom's door only inches from where my head had been. Justice finally caught up with our unwelcome visitor 6 months later. His name was Nick Stevens. The police found him responding to a 911 call amidst a bloody scene, parents dead in their bed and a teenage boy shot through the chest. A police search of his hoarder's nest of an apartment found piles of spiral notebooks, a history of mental illness, crimes, and rants about his life of poverty and addiction, as well as a shocking glimpse into a broken man whose identity had been lost to delusions of Santa Claus. He even wrote poems about his Yuletide work and illustrated them with crayon. He had only recently gotten temporary work at the mall after many months of unemployment when we'd met him. The cops figured he'd noticed the Star of Christmas on my mother's neck and, honestly, probably overestimated its value. He'd then followed us home using the address we'd given one of his elves so they could mail us my picture with Santa. My misinterpretation of the game almost definitely saved my mother's life that night. The police used the journal to place him at the scene of at least 3 equally violent unsolved break-ins over the past few years. From what Officer Newport was able to tell me, he dressed as St. Nick for every one of them. That link had never been discovered, however, because before our house, he'd never left anyone alive when he invaded a home. He told me that the man had preferred to strangle his victims in their sleep. Always the adults first, because, as he'd written, grown-ups never believe. Using the gun only as a last resort if a pet came snooping. Or a kid. That picture did arrive, by the way. We'd gone to stay with my aunt and uncle and had our mail forwarded while we looked for a new place to live. We couldn't go back to that house. Mom threw the envelope in the trash without even opening it. I retrieved it after everyone had gone to bed. I don't know why I did that, but I still have it. It sits on a shelf of other childhood mementos, still unopened. Needless to say, I avoid them all from October to January. The worst part is the copycats. The magic of Christmas is a powerful thing. There are Santa sightings, encounters, the occasional mugging. Just a few a year, but the news trickles in. It's sort of like that clown thing a few years back. Most people think it's funny, but I'm not laughing. Santa Claus will forever be associated in my mind with the first and only time I've had a firearm pointed at my head. Which is why I lay sleepless every December 24th with a good book, a drink, and my own gun on my nightstand. I couldn't sleep if I wanted to anyway. If I ever get another visit from St. Nicholas, I'll be ready.